how can you apply blockchain outside of cryptocurrency? Find out today with a repeat guest, Jack Levin, who is the founder and CEO of Nventify. Welcome back to the show again, Jack. This is your second time on Scale Your Code. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do this episode again is because the first one was just extremely interesting and the audience reacted very well to it. So please check out, if you're listening to this for the first time and you don't know who Jack is, please check out the first episode, maybe even before you listen to this episode, although they're going to be different episodes anyway. So you could always start with this one and then go back later on. But Jack, give us a little bit of an overview of your background without going into too much detail since we already covered that in the previous episode. Where do you come from? What are some of the roles that you've been into in the past? And what are you working on today at Imagizer and Nventify?
So thanks for having me. Again, always a pleasure. Where I come from is basically the IT background. Officially, I'm a computer science major, but I haven't really been a software developer in any way. I have spent a lot of time developing for computer systems and working with architectures. So I came into the Valley in '97, got my first job in I think it's summer of '97, spent about 1 year working there. The company closed very quickly. It was a startup, didn't work out. The next job, which I guess I would call my official job, was Google. I met Sergey at Stanford in '99, and they only had 7 people in the company. And I spent a few minutes talking to him, and he said, "Yeah, we're building a search engine. It's going to be awesome. Do you need a job?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I can stop by and check you guys out." And the rest is history. So I spent about 6 years building Google's architecture from the ground up. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I really did not know what it would become. And I definitely learned a lot because when I came in, I figured I have some basics, and I definitely spent all those 6 years building on those basics. And eventually, after Google in 2005, I decided to go ahead and start my own thing. So I started this startup called Imagizer, which is essentially an image hosting company, not dissimilar from Flickr or PhotoBucket. Raised money, hired a bunch of people, essentially a lot of fun developing that company. And ultimately, once we figured that that sort of business that we're in is extremely competitive, the advertising supporting revenue was kind of being flat, we essentially decided to close it down and start a new company called Nventify. Now, Nventify is where I am today, and Nventify is a company behind this product that we call Imagizer. And Imagizer is an extremely fast cloud image transformation solution that allows companies to solve their image manipulation problems. Specifically, Nordstrom.com, if you go to Nordstrom.com and browse their image catalog, you're going to see that all of the pictures are nicely sized for both desktop and mobile, and all of the resizing and manipulation and transformation happens by using Imagizer. So we're focusing on large e-commerce companies today, like Macy's, Home Depot, also trying to hit all the other big names like Pinterest. Essentially, if a company has a lot of images in their image library, we would like to offer our services as far as image manipulation as software, essentially. So that's where we are today.
And so Imagizer, which we cover in the first episode in quite a bit of depth, can process images on the fly. They can resize images in 25 milliseconds or less. It's very impressive technology, a fascinating interview. Please do check that out. But one of the things that Jack did right before we started recording this episode was he threw me a major curveball. I came in here thinking that we were going to have a different conversation, and then all of a sudden he drops a bomb saying that Imagizer, or a lot of the clients that they've been working with, have lots and lots of images that they're trying to figure out what to do with. And so now they're starting to use Imagizer as the engine and move it towards blockchain to help solve some of those problems. Tell us more about what you're doing now for the last couple months.
Yeah, so this is an entirely new project. It's very exciting. I am personally very excited about it. And it really started out from the fact is that where Imagizer is a real-time image optimization service and the system and the layer. There's some cases exist where, for example, a client of ours may have up to 1 billion images, and they need to process those images, not necessarily on the fly, but they actually need to derive or maybe extract some metadata or tag those images. So we're talking about petabytes and petabytes of data. So essentially, it's big data meeting computer vision. And one way to solve problems like this is to build very, very expensive and large computing cluster, like something that you would be able to do on AWS or Google Compute Cloud. It would cost you a lot of money. You'll have to hire a lot of engineering resources and essentially build custom software and run your image processing within that cloud or within that cluster. So the approach that we're trying to develop is essentially we're planning to use blockchain as a distribution and fulfillment layer for the clients that have, let's say, 1 billion images, and let's say that that client actually wants to find locations of people's faces on all of those pictures. And currently, if they were to run a cluster with, let's say, 500 servers or even 1,000 servers, it might take up to a month to run that sort of image processing. Now, with blockchain, we can have what generally people would call miners. Rather than mining for hashes in cryptocurrency, those miners or workers can receive a piece of code that will have a set of instructions as well as receive the subset of images and run image processing on their spare CPU cycles on their laptops or at home or anywhere else. So it's not dissimilar to SETI at home, for example, or Folding at home, where both of those systems run distributed computing. But here, we're using blockchain as the backbone that receives the tasks and passes those tasks and subtasks to the willing participants, which we call workers or miners. But again, for miners, rather than mining for cryptocurrency, ask you to do something useful, like request fulfillment from a client, essentially, right? And then once they finish their task, they get paid by either cryptocurrency or maybe PayPal, or everything can be done through our portal.
So two things. One, walk me through how Imagizer fits into that, what part it plays. But before we do that, tell me if my analogy is correct, if I'm thinking in the right direction here. So you know how with CAPTCHA, where you have to type in the letters that you see in the image to confirm that you're not a robot. When you do that, it's my understanding that in the past at least, you were actually helping decipher text that had been scanned to be able to be added into a digital library. So oftentimes the machines weren't able to decipher this is an A, B, C, or D, or et cetera. And by having the people type in the confirmation, it was helping those engines figure out, yes, okay, this is an A, this is a B, this is a C, et cetera. What you're talking about here, if I'm right, is you're essentially removing the need for that human being to do that, but at the same time, you're paying that person for their computational power, right? Is that kind of the similar thing?
It's even simpler than that. When it comes to computer vision and face detection, we essentially, pretty much anyone today can take an existing neural network that's been trained to recognize faces. That neural network is not necessarily large, but it has been computed, it's smart enough, it has very high accuracy of, like, let's say 95%. There's a lot of open source tools like that available. It's actually part of Imagizer today. So with Imagizer, you can on the fly do face detection. So what we would do is we would take our Imagizer code with our neural net, push it around to our workers via blockchain, and have them do the work of Imagizer, but do it not in time of the web query like Imagizer works today, but rather receive a very massive task. Let's say do face detection on 100,000 images. It may take a couple hours to do, but if you parallelize this task and have 10,000 people working, that's 10,000 computing hours crammed in 1 hour. right? Which is you could get that sort of system launched or get your workers organized within a few minutes, rather than building out a cluster that runs 1,000 servers. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to software, or specifically any sort of detection, all of that already been invented. What hasn't been invented is the ability to organize spare CPU cycles from the people who are currently mining for cryptocurrency. And again, I'm not saying that you can only be a worker if you're mining. You can be a worker if you essentially decide to visit Imagizer.com and sign up to be a worker. We'll give you a piece of software that you will run in the background on your laptop that will essentially wait for tasks. And you can actually manage how many CPU cores or memory or time you want to rent out to a potential client.
So right now what you're saying is I could go, for example, to Imagizer.com and I can sign up for that. I download that piece of software. I can configure it to say, don't use any more than this amount of computational power. And from there, the computer, whenever it's active or the CPU cycles are available, can receive those requests. And as it receives those requests, it processes it and then sends it back through your engine to the requester, to the client that's asking for that work to be done. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's how it's going to work when we launch. So the blockchain layer facilitates the transactions between the requester and the worker. Mm-hmm. There's also a verification layer. Like, for example, you can have workers that may potentially have bad hardware, and so they don't return the proper results. In this case, we would be using a consensus swarm algorithms where some workers will be acting as QA verifiers, and some workers will simply be doing the work. And once you reach positive consensus that this work is actually accurate, you can send it back to the client, and the client will essentially flag it as the task complete, and all of the workers get paid. So it's not dissimilar to Airbnb.
Yeah.
With Airbnb, you have some space that you can rent out for people to live for a certain period of time. Here, if you have spare CPU capacity, you can totally rent it out by connecting to our blockchain network and becoming a peer and a worker that can receive and do tasks. Now, when I said face detection, this is only one example. You can do other things, like, for example, run OCR, where you can say, here's 100 million PDF documents. We really want to transcribe them in text. So how do you do it? You would run something like an OCR that is also a neural network that will read and understand the words and place words in the text files, and those text files will be returned back to the requester. The other potential task would be that if you have very high resolution images and you want to, all of those images are, let's say, they're either TIFF or PNG or JPEG, but you really want them to be WebP, so the latest Google format for web images. You could technically run a task to convert between formats for your complete image library. So you would potentially pay only $100 and get your task done in 1 hour. Mm-hmm. No engineering resources required.
So walk me through how that works on that client's perspective. I understand how it works on the individual, like if I wanted to sign up and make money off of that and be able to help in that capacity. How does it work on the client's perspective? How do I go if I'm XYZ customer and I have those like a billion images that I want to have some work done against it? How does that work? How does Imagizer fit into that?
Okay, so what you would do is you would go to our portal, Imagizer.com. You would publish your task for consumption or for work available. And there you can basically say, I have that many units, this is what I want to do with them, and we can literally publish what's possible. Like, for example, WebP conversion could be one task, face detection could be another task, image tagging can be yet another task. So you publish your essentially source of where your data is, which could be Amazon S3, for example. So all of your images are sitting there, they're waiting to be processed. And what our system will do is it will take your task and wrap it into a JSON container, or kind of like a work description be broadcast across our blockchain to all of the available workers. If workers agree that they want to do this particular task, where the reward is high enough, like let's say that I want to be paid $10 an hour, or $5 an hour, $1 an hour. You as a worker can configure your client side to only be connected to jobs that pay that much. Like if somebody pays 50 cents an hour, you can say, I will reject those jobs. I will not even hear them. So once this sort of negotiation completes, you become, as a worker, you can become part of the peer-to-peer network, part of the swarm, receive your task, get your task done, get paid for it. And essentially, it's up to a client or a requester to put up the kind of like the final dollar in totality, and they wouldn't necessarily even know how their funds are going to be distributed, because you can have 100 workers working on your task, or you may have 10,000 workers working on your task. So our system will handle the funds disbursement and payments in a safe manner through the blockchain.
So one of the things that really impressed me the most with Imagizer in the first episode was the fact that you didn't have to manage any infrastructure at all. All you had to do was focus on the software component of it, because then a customer of yours who lived on AWS would just spin up an image with your software baked into it and just pay for the fee of the instance and that image, and then you would take a cut out of that. So you never had to deal with any of the infrastructure. Is that still the case? Is that still how it works, or do you now have to add some infrastructure in order to manage that transaction?
Okay, so our philosophy always was that we really wanted to reduce any sort of friction between the clients and the service. So Imagizer.com is extremely simple in terms of how you can configure it and how you can pay for it. So in other words, we don't lock you into a contract of any kind. There's no really sales process besides a POC, and a POC is just being a proof of concept where we give you a bunch of credits that you can run on Imagizer.com. So it's not dissimilar to AWS billing model, where you pay as you go, and that reduces the fact that there's really no any sort of commitment or lock-in on the client side when using Imagizer. When it comes to actual image manipulation, Imagizer was designed to remove the back-end engineering and replace it essentially with a software that does one thing and one thing really well. Mm-hmm. So really you just basically take the tasks of image manipulation and give controls to the UI and UX teams so that you can develop your CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and manipulate your backend image library layer on how you see fit for your product. When it comes to blockchain, yes, blockchain is a big buzzword today, but in reality what it is and what we see it as is we see it as a computer peer-to-peer network that can be essentially used to connect requesters and workers. And that also makes it very simple.
I think your lights just went out.
Yeah, let me get the light back on.
All right.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I've been sitting very quietly and now moving. That's when that happens.
It always looked like there was some color inversion there. I'm like, is he messing with the color settings, or that looked pretty creepy. So going back to the infrastructure and the simplicity, I know that was a very intentional decision on your part to keep it that simple, whereas some of the other image processing providers have that infrastructure they have to manage, and it's a different kind of offering and model. But the reason that I bring that back up is because, like I just said, that was a very intentional decision on your part. Now, I know for a fact that one of the major challenges that product and engineering teams and CEOs struggle with sometimes in terms of keeping that simplicity when it comes to deciding what kinds of features to implement, the messaging, the market that you go after. And so I guess my question is, when you made that conscious decision, correct me if I'm wrong, but that probably even limited the size of the market that you can go after, because some of the customers might require for you to have that infrastructure, so they might go with another provider that does it instead. So what was the thought process behind limiting that market and instead being hyper-focused on a certain group or a certain market or vertical? What was that decision like, and why did you make that decision?
Well, I think the decision came from the fact that we really wanted to study the markets and affect the market and provide services for the markets that we could have the most impact at. So in other words, we decided to go after e-commerce market because those companies and those businesses are hyper competitive between themselves. So they are always looking for performance improvement. Where if you just basically look at all the companies that provide images online or access to images online, they do have the need for image manipulation, but they're not as sensitive to the performance as e-commerce companies, for example, would be, because it is a well-known fact that if you wait 1 second or if your web page is delayed by a second, you actually lose about 7% of your sales in a year. So for large companies like Macy's, Nordstrom, Home Depot, this is a huge hit on their sales. And when we talk about, let's say that we talk about social media apps or social media websites, it is not the same thing. For strategy, their users are mostly engaged with the sites in a different way. When it comes to e-commerce, it's all about showing the products in the right kind of format, getting people to buy those products and execute those transactions. So we focused on the largest markets that has the largest impact on our bottom line. Like, for example, when we try to sign up a client, we really want to make between $500,000 to $1 million a year with that client when it comes to sales. So we're not necessarily interested in 10,000 clients that are going to be paying us $100 a month. Mm-hmm. That is not what we're focusing on. So by restricting kind of like our scope, we are able to tune the product, which is Imagizer, so that it can be really good for that specific market, rather than being very, very scattered across, all the features that are possible and try to satisfy everyone, but really struggle against, the headwind of pretty much everybody wanting you to do a different thing and pulling you in different directions. So being a small team of 7 people, we made a conscious decision to really focus on e-commerce, specifically on large e-commerce companies, so that we can dedicate our resources to working with them specifically. Such as, like, for example, if Nordstrom calls or Macy's calls, right, we really shouldn't be talking to 1,000 other companies that are small startups, right? We really should be focusing on those large companies. And so by being a small team, we're able to really give them full attention.
Did you always plan on going that direction and focusing on larger customers but fewer customers? Or was that a conscious shift of you didn't start in that direction and then you realized through whatever method that was the direction for you to go after?
It wasn't originally the plan. And the funny thing about running your company or developing a software service business is that everyone has an ego. And I certainly have an ego, right? I certainly want to think that our service and our software is needed by absolutely everyone. And so it's kind of I wouldn't say it's a very difficult process, but it's definitely a process to convince oneself to leave some money or some effort on the table, so to speak, and focus on this one vertical and be really good at it. But I think it's the right thing to do, egos aside, and because ultimately it changes how your bottom line is affected. Mm-hmm. And so for the first year or so, we dabbled in different markets. We looked at social media sites, we looked at mobile apps, we looked at mobile site development companies. Ultimately, we realized that it is e-commerce where we can make the most money or the most revenue in the shortest amount of time. And it simplifies our operations because once you talk to 3 e-commerce clients, it is very likely that if you talk to 3 more, you will speak the same language. Mm-hmm. So in other words, you don't have to explain your product to them in terms that you do not know, or you need to develop kind of like a different angle for them. It's all pretty much the same thing because they all have very similar problems.
The other thing is you told me that shift in mindset also required a change in messaging. So whereas before you might have talked about how Imagizer can help load images a lot faster through the web for your customers, that might speak more to the engineering level. But for the types of customers that you're going after, the engineers may not actually be the decision makers. So instead, you had to talk about the reduction in costs, the increases in revenue by loading images faster, and every second of delay causes X amount of revenue loss, and so on and so forth. How did you get to the point where you realized that messaging needed to shift, and how do you recommend that other companies figure that out on their own?
I think this can be done preemptively through research. So in other words, if you go to Google, obviously, right, and you type website performance, top 10 things you must do, right, it is very likely that you're going to see that if you want to make more sales, your pages should load quicker, they should organize properly, they should have proper formats, you should be using a CDN, so on and so on and so on. So it's not a very difficult process to get there. Just, if you spend time doing research and just pretend that you're running a company like an e-commerce company. Like I have recently met a person who started a shoe company in Utah, and it was very interesting to go through a process of how they got the whole thing up and running, and what their competition is and how they think. So definitely, I would say the first thing one should do is just tap into an abundance of information that's available online, go to conferences, talk to people, interact, network, see what kind of problems that the chief revenue officers are waking up thinking at night, or if you're a CEO of a smaller e-commerce company, that just ask them a few questions like, what are you worried about? Mm-hmm. Like, is performance important? Are you using a CDN? Why aren't you using a CDN? How many CDNs are you using, for example, right? Are you using Amazon Cloud Services or not? Or just come up with a list of 5 questions that you would ask a person at the conference, and just go through it and record it in your mind and build that sort of profile. And then you actually know what your product should look like, because you will find patterns, and kind of like people end up creating this sort of template for you to be able to build a product that is compatible with.
And the other part of that is sales, right? And so one of the tendencies, especially with technical founders, is to focus a lot more on the product than the sales component of it, because they'll think, hey, the product, if the product is amazing, it will speak for itself. It will grow organically. People will refer to it and whatnot. So maybe they don't focus as much on sales, or they delay hiring a sales team for a while. And in fact, I think that's one of the things that you did at ImageCheck as well, since I quote, you told me, we always thought that this would be a technology company, so we didn't invest in sales, end quote. So the first question, I guess, is, when do you think that is the case? When do you think that it's okay to really pour all of your efforts into the products, delay the sales component, or even don't have any sales component, versus focus on both the product and then find somebody that's more sales oriented?
Well, I would say that's an easy question with an easy answer. If your product is bad, it sucks, and you know it, right? No point selling it. I mean, you're not going to be successful at selling something that doesn't work very well. So you absolutely have to either raise money, hire people, work on it yourself, take it to a level where you're satisfied with it. I mean, it doesn't need to be a complete package, but whatever it does, it has to do well. If it does image conversion between different formats, it has to do it well. It cannot crap out on certain image formats. It doesn't need to do the whole kitchen sink, but you have to bring a product to the market that you can actually sell and not rely on essentially thinking that you're working so hard on it and you put so much time in it and you have so much passion, right? None of those things will actually make sales. So wait until your product is ready, hire a sales team, preferably hire a VP of sales that can organize the sales organization under and push to the market.
How did you find your VP of sales, and how do you measure their success when maybe you don't have that sales background?
So we found our sales VP of sales person at the conference called SaaStr. And the way we found them is that we were looking to go to learn more about the software service market. And we saw his picture on as a testimonial for SaaStr. And I took down his name and I took down everybody's names. And then I checked to see if he or all of those people are coming to the conference. We went to the conference, we found him, we pitched Imagizer, and his first reaction was like, hey, this is just like Pied Piper, my favorite show, image compression, and that's, real Silicon Valley thing, He really got interested, and we had a lot of good rapport pretty much right away, and within 3 weeks, he was hired at Nventify.
I was going to go back and say, I've definitely seen some crappy products with great sales team do fairly well. Usually that doesn't last very long though, because then you have a competitor that does actually build a better product and they start taking over. But anyway, I digress there. All right, so to wrap up, more of a wild card question. What is your opinion of Bitcoin right now?
It's like a loaded question, right? So
that's the point.
So I think about Bitcoin in two different ways. One, Bitcoin is a storage of value that you can trade. And I would say 90% of the people in the world are excited specifically about that. Is putting money into Bitcoin and having that money grow, multiply, or whatever, right? That is interesting, and it's really speculative and exciting for some people. The other aspect of Bitcoin is underlying technology like blockchain. I am very interested in blockchain because it's mature enough and it's been around for long enough to prove to the world that it's very difficult to circumvent as far as the platform is concerned. Ethereum is another blockchain platform that solves and makes blockchain more production ready, that you can do great things on, like smart contracts. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm very excited about building on that platform. I think the combining the economic value of cryptocurrency with the things that you can do in peer-to-peer fashion on the technology end makes it almost as important as essentially start of internet in 1992. So we are at the level here where blockchain can not necessarily solve problems, but it can open doors into so many interesting venues for technology and economics. And I'm very excited in all kinds of different businesses just coming up and using this technology. Right now, if you go to IBM, you can actually launch a private enterprise blockchain for yourself using IBM Cloud. You can do the same at Oracle. I see Google and Amazon very quickly developing similar products where you can just log into your cloud, rent a piece of blockchain, and do a lot of interesting things with it.
I know that you're an advisor also. Have you invested in any blockchain companies working around blockchain that you can share publicly, or are you looking at any companies right now that you think are doing really cool things with blockchain?
Not specifically. I haven't really invested in any startups, but I'm definitely looking out for startups that are working with blockchain technology. And if there is a startup out there, I would definitely be seriously considering investing. One company that's public called Overstock.com, that I simply bought their public shares. I think they're one of the companies that are using blockchain for their new token called T0. I think that's interesting. I wanted to buy their shares just to see where, what will happen. Definitely, I would say if you want to get exposure to blockchain technologies as an investor, just buy all the cloud companies. Buy Google, buy Amazon, buy IBM, buy Oracle. Likely all of those companies will benefit from rise in blockchain use.
Jack, thanks so much for your time again for the second episode. It's been a pleasure having you on the show both times. If anybody wants to follow up with you or if they have any questions, how can they reach out to you?
You can reach out to me via my LinkedIn, Jack Levin on LinkedIn, or my email address, jack@nventify.com.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Please leave a comment below and thank Jack for his time. And see you next time. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks, Christophe. Bye-bye.